Mr. Speaker, like most Americans, I store a lot on my computer and on my phone. Family photographs, personal calendars, emails, schedules, and even weekend do lists, or as my wife calls them, honey-do lists. But this information stored on a phone, like this one I have right here, is not private from the prying, spying eyes of government. Most Americans have no idea that Big Brother can snoop on tweets, G-chats, texts, Instagrams, and even emails. Anything that is stored in the cloud is available to be spied on by government as long as it's older than 180 days. Now, why is that? Well, it goes back to the outdated Electronic Communication Privacy Act of 1986. That act protects privacy of emails that are less than 6 months old. 1986. Those were the days before the World Wide Web even existed. Many of us, I do, have staff that weren't even born before 1986. And we stored letters in folders and filing cabinets and desk drawers. No one knew what the cloud was because the cloud didn't even exist. There was not any broadband, there was no social media, there were no tablets or smartphones. The relatively few people who used email, and I remember when email was invented, never imagined keeping email longer than it took to send it or read it. So it's perfectly reasonable that in 1986, lawmakers tried to protect emails, but only did so for 180 days. Who would keep anything online for longer than 6 months? Well, 3 decades later, we know. Everybody stores their emails. But under current law, every email and text, every Google Doc, Facebook message, every picture, photograph of vacations is subject to government inspection without a warrant, without probable cause, and without our knowledge if it's older than 6 months. That's an invasion of privacy. Constitutional protection for 6 months only? That's nonsense. What's worse, some government agencies don't want the law changed. The Securities and Exchange Commission is lobbying to keep the law on the books. Why does the SEC want to maintain this spying ability? Well, I suspect they want to be able to read our personal financial records and communications without the constitutional protection of a search warrant and without our knowledge. It sounds like conduct reminiscent of the old Soviet Union to me, the spying on the citizens by government. The SEC is not the only government agency that has access to emails over 6 months old. Any government agency can go and confiscate emails older than 6 months without a warrant, without probable cause, and without knowledge of the person. This is a clear violation of the Constitution, in my opinion. Mr. Speaker, if you go back to snail mail and you write a letter and you put a stamp on it and you put it in the mailbox, that letter floats around the fruited plain until it ends up in somebody's possession. Government cannot seize that letter and go in and snoop around and look in there and see what it is. Email is a form of communication. Why should government have the ability to snoop around in our personal emails? They don't have that right, even though they have the ability. Whatever our political disagreements on both sides, most Americans, I believe, share the conviction that privacy is protected by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to protect us from unreasonable searches and seizures from government. Protect us in our persons, houses, papers, and personal effects. Government agents can't raid homes or tap into phones or read mail without showing a judge they have probable cause that a crime was committed. Then a search warrant must be obtained. Mr. Speaker, I was a judge for 22 years in Texas, and officers would come to me with search warrants, and I would read, see if they had probable cause. If they did, I'd sign a warrant. That's what the Constitution requires before you can go snoop around and spy on Americans. Why should our possessions and communications be less private just because they are online? Well, they shouldn't be. That's why I've teamed up with Representative Zola Lofgren on the other side and lots of other members of Congress in both parties to introduce legislation to update the outdated EPCA law. There's also a bill in the Senate that enjoys the same support. Our bills restore EPCA's original purpose to protect privacy in the ways we live, communicate, learn, and transact business and recreate today. This legislation would protect the sacred right of privacy from the ever-increasing spying government trolls in America. Our mission is simple: extend constitutional protections to communications and records that Americans store online for any amount of time. There's no need to delay. The bill is written. The votes are there. Let's pass the legislation. Mr. Speaker, technology may change, but the Constitution remains the same. Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, government is created to protect our rights. It's about time we make government protect the right of privacy rather than violate the right of privacy.
Gentleman's
and that's
time has
just the way it is. I'll yield back.